The sun had barely risen over the dusty hills, painting the horizon in muted shades of gray and pale orange, when Zara crouched low in the rubble-strewn alleyway, her gloved hands sweeping through the dirt to collect the scattered brass casings that glimmered faintly in the early light. The war-torn village was silent now, but that silence carried a tension she had learned to recognize over the months of fighting, a kind of heavy, oppressive stillness that came only after chaos. The air still smelled of gunpowder and smoke, and the sand beneath her boots was darkened by the marks of last night's firefight. She moved quickly but carefully, the rhythmic clink of brass dropping into her pouch the only sound breaking the morning calm. Zara wasn't a soldier, at least she hadn't been when this all started. She had grown up in this very village, her world once limited to tending goats and weaving rugs with her mother in a house that no longer existed. The war had stripped everything from her, her family, her home, her innocence, and left her with nothing but the skills she had learned to survive. At first, she had been just a scavenger, combing the aftermath of battles to collect anything she could sell or trade. But when a unit of resistance fighters had found her crawling through the rubble with a sack full of ammunition, they'd seen something in her, a spark of fearlessness, maybe even recklessness, and offered her a place among them. At 17 she had accepted, not out of loyalty or ideology, but because it was safer to be with them than alone. She didn't fire rifles, not yet. Her role was simple. After each skirmish she followed behind, collected the brass, checked for live rounds, and salvaged whatever supplies they left behind. It was dirty, dangerous work, but it was hers, and in this shattered land that was enough. That morning, as she moved methodically from one abandoned firing position to another, she felt the heat of the rising sun on her back, making her sweat under the loose scarf wrapped around her head. Her fingers brushed over a patch of warm sand where a shell had landed, and she carefully plucked the casing, turning it in her hand. She'd learned to read the battlefield like a book. The distance between spent casings told her where the shooter had crouched, the angle of a dropped magazine revealed whether they'd been reloading under fire or calmly changing out. She noticed these details without thinking now, her sharp eyes scanning for any sign of danger even as she worked. The sniper teams from the British forces had been active in this area for weeks, picking off resistance fighters with frightening precision. Their reputation preceded them, ghosts who could end a man's life from kilometers away, soldiers who struck silently and vanished before anyone could react. Zara had seen men drop dead before they even realized they were being hunted. She knew the risks of scavenging out here, but this was the only way she could contribute to her unit's survival. Every bullet casing, every discarded magazine, every weapon part she recovered meant they could reload, repair, and fight another day. That was all that mattered. She crouched low behind a crumbled wall, running her fingers over the cool steel of a disassembled rifle she'd just uncovered, her keen senses alert for the faintest sound. A soft breeze shifted, carrying with it the distant scent of gun oil, something that didn't belong in this burned-out village. Her heart thudded. She froze, her instincts screaming at her. The village might have been abandoned, but she wasn't alone. Slowly, she eased the strap of her pouch over her shoulder, her other hand brushing against the handle of the battered sidearm she carried, more for comfort than effectiveness. The sound came again, faint but deliberate, the soft scrape of a boot sole against stone. She scanned the rooftops, the windows, the shattered remains of buildings until her gaze locked on something, a brief glint of sunlight reflecting off glass. A scope. Someone was watching her. Zara ducked instinctively, rolling behind the wall as a bullet sliced through the air where she had been crouching seconds before, cracking into the dirt with terrifying accuracy. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but instead of panicking, she pressed herself against the wall, her mind racing. This was no random shot. Whoever had her in their sights was a professional, and if they wanted her dead, she wouldn't have heard that first bullet. A warning. A challenge. Slowly, she raised her head just enough to peer over the edge of the wall, her sharp eyes scanning the far ridge. There, a faint silhouette prone atop a ruined building nearly 4 kilometers away, motionless except for the subtle shift of a rifle barrel. A British sniper. She'd heard stories of these men, their impossible accuracy, their patience, their ability to wait hours for a single shot. And now one of them was watching her, letting her know it. She exhaled slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she ducked back down. She had 2 options: stay pinned here until he decided to kill her or fight back. But how could she possibly fight a sniper at that distance with her ragged skills? She wasn't a sharpshooter, she'd barely fired a rifle outside of practice. Yet something in her stirred, anger, maybe pride. She was tired of being hunted, tired of being the scavenger hiding in shadows. She thought of her father, killed in front of their home, of her brother, dragged away by soldiers whose faces she couldn't forget. This sniper wasn't the man who'd done it, but he represented everything she hated about this war. Faceless enemies with perfect aim, pressing down on her world from a distance. She clenched her jaw and made her decision. Moving low and quick, she darted into the ruins of a nearby building, keeping her body close to the ground. Bullets didn't follow, confirming her suspicion. He was testing her, toying with her. Inside the crumbling structure, she found what she was looking for, an old sniper rifle propped against the wall, its barrel scratched but functional. She'd taken it off a fallen fighter weeks ago, but had never fired it. Her hands moved with surprising confidence as she checked the bolt, loaded a single round and adjusted the scope. She had seen snipers in her unit do this 100 times. Their instructions came back to her now, step by step, in a calm voice that steadied her. Find your breath. Control it. Squeeze, don't jerk. She crawled to a shattered window that gave her a view of the distant ridge. The sun had risen higher now, casting harsh light over the landscape. Through the scope, she spotted him. A man in desert camouflage, his face hidden under a boonie hat, his rifle resting steady on a bipod. He wasn't moving. Waiting. Zara settled into position, her body prone against the dusty floor, the stock of the rifle pressed tight to her shoulder. Her breathing slowed, her mind narrowing to a single point of focus. The wind was calm, the distance impossible. 4,000 meters. No one in her unit had ever attempted a shot like that. But something inside her refused to back down. She shifted slightly, adjusting the scope, her finger curling around the trigger. The sniper's patience met hers in an invisible duel across the barren landscape, two predators locked in a silent contest of will. The seconds stretched into minutes as Zara lay perfectly still, her cheek pressed against the worn rifle stock, the faint smell of gun oil and dust filling her senses. Every instinct screamed at her to crawl away, to find cover and disappear into the maze of ruined homes, but she silenced that voice, forcing herself to remain calm. She knew what the sniper was doing, testing her patience, waiting for her to flinch, to expose herself, to confirm that she was armed. He was a professional hunter, and hunters never rushed. The wind whispered softly through shattered windows, carrying the distant caw of a crow circling above the village. She adjusted her breathing, slow and steady, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, her eye focused through the scratched lens of the scope, where the figure on the ridge remained perfectly motionless. He could have fired again already, but he hadn't. That meant something. He wanted her to try. He wanted this to be a duel. Zara had grown up watching her father hunt wolves in the hills with an old bolt-action rifle. She'd watched him spend hours lying in the grass, waiting for the perfect shot. She remembered the way he explained wind, distance, and patience as if they were part of a language only hunters spoke. Now, years later, those lessons came rushing back. She adjusted the rifle slightly, feeling the strain in her arms as she lined up the crosshairs on the sniper's position. She was no marksman, but she was a survivor, and survival had taught her how to adapt quickly. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to calm down, counting her breaths. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Wait. She knew she couldn't rely on perfect aim. At this distance, luck would play as much a role as skill, but luck was something she'd learned to create. The sniper's scope glinted again in the sunlight, a brief flash that confirmed his position beyond any doubt. Zara shifted her body, steadying herself against the rubble. Her hands stopped trembling. She became a statue, her pulse slowing as if she'd merged with the rifle. This was no longer about collecting casings. This was about proving she wasn't prey. She tightened her grip, her finger easing pressure onto the trigger, ready to fire. But then, something unexpected happened. The sniper moved. It was subtle, barely a twitch of his rifle barrel, but it told her everything. He'd seen her. He knew she was aiming back. That tiny movement was both a warning and a taunt. She swallowed hard, suppressing the urge to pull the trigger impulsively. Instead, she waited. If she fired first and missed, she'd be dead within seconds. The sun climbed higher, turning the broken village into a shimmering maze of heat waves that danced across her view through the scope. Sweat ran down her temple, dripping onto the stock of the rifle, but she didn't dare wipe it away. She adjusted her aim slightly, compensating for the mirage effect, her breathing shallow and controlled. The sniper had gone still again, his silhouette merging with the rubble on the distant ridge. He was good, far better than anyone she'd ever faced. He knew how to blend with his surroundings, to become invisible. But she had learned from hunters who stalked wolves in the mountains. She knew how to read terrain, to notice the faintest irregularity. Through the shimmer of heat, she saw him clearly, as if the world around her had faded into a tunnel of focus. A sudden sound shattered the silence. A distant burst of automatic gunfire from somewhere beyond the hills. It was far away, unrelated to their standoff, but the sound carried over the barren land, echoing like thunder. Zara flinched, instinctively lowering her head for a split second, and in that instant, a bullet struck the stone wall inches above her. Dust exploded around her face, and she felt the sharp sting of pebbles against her cheek. The sniper had fired. He'd been waiting for her to react to that distraction, and she had. Her pulse spiked, but instead of panicking, she stayed perfectly still. If she moved now, she'd be dead. She exhaled slowly, her nerves on fire, her body trembling with adrenaline. He was toying with her, forcing her into mistakes, but she wasn't going to give him that satisfaction again. Slowly, she crawled backward inch by inch, careful not to make noise. She needed a better position, one where she could see him without exposing herself. The ruined building offered little cover, but she spotted a narrow staircase leading to the roof, half collapsed but still climbable. She slung the rifle across her back and began to climb, every movement deliberate and silent. The stairs groaned under her weight and dust rained down, but the sniper didn't fire. Maybe he thought she was still pinned. Maybe he was repositioning too. She reached the top, crawling onto the rooftop where jagged pieces of rebar and shattered tiles offered cover. The view from here was better. She could see the entire ridge, the sniper's location more clearly, though he was now just a faint shape among the rocks. Zara lay flat, her body pressed against the hot concrete, and repositioned the rifle. Her hands were steady now, her breathing calm. The world narrowed again to the crosshairs in her scope. She studied him carefully, noting the angle of his rifle, the way his shoulders rose and fell with slow breaths. He was watching her position, confident, waiting for a mistake. She couldn't outshoot him in terms of skill. But maybe she could outthink him. Slowly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, cracked mirror she'd scavenged weeks ago. She slid it along the ground beside her, angling it to catch the sunlight. Then, with careful precision, she tilted the mirror until a beam of reflected light flashed across the ridge. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but she saw it. The sniper flinched. His scope shifted just slightly, and that was all she needed. She took a breath, let it out, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the ruins like thunder, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. For a moment, she couldn't see through the cloud of dust kicked up by the muzzle blast. She blinked hard, adjusting her aim, scanning the ridge. The sniper's silhouette was no longer visible. Her heart pounded in her ears as she searched for movement, for any sign of life. Then she saw it, a faint puff of dust near the ridge where he'd been lying. He'd moved, rolling to the side. She hadn't hit him. Not directly. But she'd forced him out of position. A surge of adrenaline filled her veins, not fear but exhilaration. She had taken the shot and lived. The sniper fired back almost instantly, his bullet striking the edge of the rooftop just feet from her. She ducked, rolling behind cover as fragments of stone flew into the air. This was no longer a one-sided hunt. She had proven herself a threat, and now he was taking her seriously. She chambered another round, her hands moving quickly, and crawled to another vantage point, staying low. The rooftop was barely holding together, chunks of debris shifting under her weight, but she moved with the agility of someone who had spent her life climbing through ruins. The duel had shifted. No longer was she a scavenger pinned down by a predator. She had become the predator too. The sniper's next shot missed her completely, striking a chimney behind her, sending a spray of bricks tumbling down. He was firing faster now, his precision shaken. That told her everything. He wasn't expecting her to fight back like this. She slid into position again, lining up her scope. Her breathing slowed. The heat shimmer distorted her view, but she found him. A flash of movement, a glimpse of his hat, the curve of his rifle barrel. She took another breath, steady and calm, and prepared to fire again. The rifle stock was warm against Zara's cheek now, the heat of the rising sun baking the rooftop beneath her body. Every second she stayed exposed here was a gamble, but she could feel the rhythm of the battle shifting in her favor. She had rattled him. She had forced him to move. And in a sniper's duel, movement was risk, movement was weakness. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with dusty air, and steadied her aim. Through the warped shimmer of heat, she saw him again, a faint shadow shifting near the ridge as he crawled to a new position. He was smart enough to change angles to throw her off, but she had learned to read the land like an open book. She followed the slight disturbance of pebbles rolling down the slope, the subtle dark line of a barrel protruding through broken stone. She smiled grimly to herself. He wasn't invisible anymore. She shifted her aim slightly, calculating the impossible distance. 4,000 meters. At that range, a bullet didn't just fly, it arced like a thrown stone, every breath of wind altering its path. She had no fancy equipment, no ballistic computer or wind meter, only instinct and memory. She recalled her father's words, "Trust the earth. Trust what you see. The land tells you everything." She exhaled, adjusted the scope, and held her breath. For a heartbeat, time seemed to slow. She squeezed the trigger gently, feeling the recoil jolt her shoulder. The sound echoed like a drumbeat across the ruins. She waited. Watch. Nothing. The sniper didn't drop. He hadn't even flinched. Zara cursed under her breath, rolling to the side just as his return shot tore through the edge of her cover, chipping concrete and showering her with grit. She kept moving, crawling like a lizard across the rooftop, every movement deliberate. The duel had become deadly serious now. No more warning shots, no more hesitation. He wanted her dead, and she wanted to prove she wasn't a target to be erased from a distance. She found another angle, this one partially obscured by the remnants of a chimney. Lying flat against the warm concrete, she steadied the rifle again. The sniper's movements were harder to track now. He'd learned her rhythm, staying low, firing from unpredictable angles. She forced herself to slow down, to let him make the next mistake. Minutes passed, each one an eternity. The silence pressed in on her, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind. Then she saw it, a tiny puff of dust near the ridge where a boot had shifted. Her pulse surged. She angled the rifle upward, compensating for distance, her finger resting on the trigger. Suddenly, a bullet whistled past her ear, so close she felt the rush of air. She ducked instinctively, her heart slamming against her ribs. He had seen her. He was anticipating her moves now. Zara rolled, sliding behind another crumbling section of wall just as another shot shattered the spot where she'd been lying. The sniper was adjusting faster than she expected. His precision was terrifying. She pressed her back to the wall, breathing hard. Her palms were slick with sweat, but her grip on the rifle never faltered. She was no trained sniper, yet something inside her, maybe desperation, maybe instinct, pushed her forward. She crawled to the edge of the roof and peered down. Below her, the village was a labyrinth of shattered homes and narrow alleyways. She could use that. If she couldn't outshoot him from here, she'd outmaneuver him. Slinging the rifle across her back, she swung her legs over the side and lowered herself carefully, landing silently on a pile of rubble. Her boots crunched softly on broken glass and she froze, listening. The sniper hadn't fired. Either he'd lost sight of her or he was letting her move. Neither possibility comforted her. Zara darted into the shadows of a collapsed building, her heart pounding. She moved fast but silent, weaving through the ruins, every sense on high alert. She was trying to close the distance, to get closer than he expected. 4,000 meters was his world, but closer range might be hers. She crouched low, listening for any sign of him. The wind shifted, carrying faint echoes. The click of a bolt action, the soft scrape of fabric against stone. She froze, her ears straining. He was still on the ridge. She could picture him, calm and methodical, scanning for her. She climbed another ruined structure, this one taller than the rest, and carefully laid the rifle on the windowsill of a shattered frame. From here she had a slightly different view of the ridge. Through the scope she caught a glimpse of him, just a sliver of movement, the curve of a shoulder as he shifted his aim. She inhaled slowly, adjusting her crosshairs, her mind calm despite the chaos. She'd always been a fast learner. The sniper's skill was beyond anything she had seen, but she was adapting. She watched him closely, studying his rhythm. Every time he scanned left, his rifle dipped a fraction of an inch. Every time he exhaled, his shoulders relaxed slightly. She started predicting his movements, memorizing the seconds between each shift. When he turned his attention left again, she fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the valley. She ducked back instantly, expecting return fire, but none came. She held her breath, pressed against the wall, and counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Silence. Slowly she peeked through the window. The sniper's silhouette was gone. Her stomach tightened. Either she'd hit him or he'd moved again. And if he'd moved, she was now the one exposed. A sudden crack split the air, and a bullet tore through the wall inches from her face. She dove backward, rolling across the floor as splinters and dust rained down. He was alive. Worse, he'd flanked her. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding, and dashed toward the stairs, moving as fast as she could without tripping over debris. Another shot shattered a beam near her head, sending wood splinters flying. He was forcing her out, driving her into the open. She sprinted down the crumbling staircase, her boots slamming against stone, and burst into the alleyway. Her breath came in sharp bursts, but her mind was clear. She needed higher ground again, somewhere unexpected. She darted into another ruin, this one partially collapsed, and scrambled up a pile of debris toward a jagged rooftop. The sniper fired again, the bullet whistling past her leg, close enough to make her stumble. She threw herself behind a stone column, panting. Through the haze of dust and fear, something sharp sparked in her mind, a plan. She dug into her pouch, pulling out 2 empty casings and a small scrap of reflective glass she'd scavenged earlier. She placed them carefully on a rock across the rooftop, angled to catch the sunlight. Then she crawled low to another vantage point, circling wide. Her bait was set. The sniper would see the reflection and assume she'd exposed herself. Minutes passed, every muscle in her body tense. Then finally the sound came, the sharp crack of a rifle firing. The bait worked. His shot struck the fake glint of glass, shattering it into tiny shards. Zara didn't waste a second. She rose just enough to aim, her breathing steady, her finger tightening on the trigger. She had one chance. She fired. The recoil jolted her shoulder. She didn't look away this time, keeping her eye on the scope. The sniper jerked violently, his rifle tumbling from his hands as his body slumped forward on the ridge. A wave of disbelief washed over her. She'd done it. She'd won. For a long moment she lay there in stunned silence, the world eerily still. Then, slowly she lowered the rifle, her hands trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. The duel was over. The world around Zara felt strangely quiet, as if the earth itself had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. She lay flat on the rooftop, the rifle still pressed to her shoulder, her eyes locked on the distant ridge where the sniper's motionless body slumped against the stones. For a few moments she couldn't move. The adrenaline that had sharpened her mind and steadied her hands drained all at once, leaving her limbs heavy and her breath ragged. She had done it. Against all odds, she had outwitted and killed a man trained for this exact kind of duel, a soldier who had likely spent years mastering the art of long-range combat. She felt no thrill of triumph, no surge of celebration. Instead, a heavy, numb sensation settled over her chest. She'd survived. That was all. She forced herself to roll over, her back pressing against the rough concrete as she stared up at the pale blue sky, streaked with thin clouds. Her hands trembled uncontrollably now, the rifle slipping slightly from her grasp. The moment of calm after battle was something she'd experienced before, but this was different. She had looked through that scope and ended a life with a single squeeze of her finger. She'd defended herself, yes, but the weight of that decision pressed down on her like the oppressive summer sun above. She stayed there for several minutes, catching her breath, her heart gradually slowing. In the distance, smoke still curled from shattered homes, the smell of burning wood and fuel drifting through the air. War had turned her village into a graveyard, and now she'd added one more body to its ruins. Slowly she pushed herself up, every muscle aching from the tension of lying still for so long. She slung the rifle across her back and climbed down from the rooftop, her movements cautious but steady. The sniper was gone, but she knew better than to assume she was safe. Soldiers never worked entirely alone. If there was one sniper, there could be more. She slipped through the shadows of the alleyways, keeping her head low as she moved toward the edge of the village. Her mind was clear now, focused entirely on survival. She needed to confirm the kill, retrieve anything useful, and disappear before reinforcements arrived. The climb to the ridge took longer than she expected. The terrain was steep and littered with loose stones that crunched under her boots. She paused often, scanning the horizon through the sniper's scope to ensure no one else had taken up position. Each time, the landscape stretched out in perfect, deadly silence. When she finally reached the spot, she crouched low, her breath quickening as she approached the man who had tried to kill her. He was lying face down, his rifle still propped on the rocks. She nudged him carefully with her boot, but he didn't move. Rolling him over, she froze for a second. He was young. Younger than she had expected. His eyes, glassy and unfocused, stared blankly at the sky. His skin was pale under the brim of his boonie hat, his lips slightly parted as if he'd been about to say something. For a brief moment, Zara felt a pang of something unexpected, pity, maybe even guilt. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man doing his job. And now he was dead. She crouched beside him, forcing herself to push the emotion away. She couldn't afford to feel anything for him. She reached for his rifle, examining it carefully. It was a modern, high-powered weapon, far superior to the battered sniper rifle she carried. She slung it over her shoulder along with his ammunition, taking every round she could find. Next, she checked his gear, A small pack with rations, a water bladder, a sidearm, and a set of binoculars. She took them all, moving quickly and efficiently. Survival was all that mattered. When she finished, she glanced down at him one last time. She wanted to close his eyes, but her hands froze halfway. This was war. He tried to kill her and she'd won. That was the only truth that mattered here. She slipped back into the shadows of the rocks, making her way down the ridge, her mind racing with possibilities. This victory wasn't just survival, it was power. In this world, people lived or died based on what they could do, what they could bring to the table. And she had just done something that even seasoned fighters rarely achieved. She had outdueled a trained sniper at impossible range. Her unit wouldn't believe her at first. They'd laugh, maybe call her a liar. But the rifle slung across her back would silence them. She imagined their faces when she showed them the weapon, when she told them what she'd done. A scavenger girl, once nothing more than a shadow picking brass from the dirt, had turned into something far more dangerous. The thought both exhilarated and frightened her. Back in the ruins of the village, she moved with more confidence now, her sharp eyes scanning every corner for danger. The sniper's absence had shifted the balance of this place. The ever-present sense of being hunted was gone, replaced by a hollow stillness. She stopped briefly to drink from the water bladder she'd taken, the cool liquid refreshing against her dry throat. Her body was exhausted, every muscle aching, but she forced herself to keep moving. She needed to get back to her unit's safe house before nightfall. Traveling after dark was suicide. As she navigated the maze of alleys and crumbling homes, memories flickered through her mind. Her father teaching her to shoot, her brother laughing as he climbed the hills, her mother humming softly while weaving rugs. All of them were gone now, stolen by this endless war. She clenched her jaw and tightened her grip on the sniper's rifle. She couldn't change the past, but maybe she could survive long enough to carve out some kind of future. She thought of the sniper again, the calm precision in his movements, the way he had hunted her with patience and skill. He had probably believed himself untouchable, invincible even. She wondered if she would feel the same one day, if killing would become easier. The thought unsettled her, but she pushed it aside. There was no room for weakness here. She stopped abruptly when a sound reached her ears, the distant thrum of engines. Her heart skipped a beat. She crouched low, pressing herself against the remains of a wall, and peered out toward the road that cut through the outskirts of the village. A convoy of armored vehicles rumbled past, their tires kicking up dust as they moved quickly toward the ridge where she had just been. Her pulse quickened. They'd come for him. She watched silently as soldiers jumped from the vehicles, spreading out with practiced precision. One of them knelt by the sniper's body. Even from this distance, Zara could feel their tension, their urgency. She stayed perfectly still, every muscle locked in place. If they found her tracks, she'd never make it out alive. Slowly, she began to back away, slipping deeper into the maze of ruins. Her mind raced with possibilities. They would assume the sniper was killed by a well-trained marksman, maybe even another sniper from a rival faction. No one would imagine that a teenage girl, a scavenger, had been the one to pull the trigger. The thought gave her a strange sense of satisfaction. She had become invisible again, but this time she was more dangerous than anyone suspected. By the time night fell, she had reached the outskirts of her group's safe house. The small building was hidden among rocky hills, its entrance camouflaged with tattered tarps and debris. She slipped inside quietly, her body aching with exhaustion. Her comrades looked up as she entered, their expression skeptical when they saw the weapon slung across her back. She didn't speak at first. She simply dropped the sniper's rifle onto the table, its sleek design gleaming under the dim lantern light. The room fell silent. "Where did you get that?" one of them whispered. Zara met their eyes, her expression calm but hard. "From the man who tried to kill me." They didn't laugh. They didn't call her a liar. They just stared at her in stunned silence. And for the first time since the war began, Zara felt something she hadn't felt in years: control. The days that followed were unlike anything Zara had ever experienced. Word of the sniper's death spread through the resistance fighters like wildfire. At first, she hadn't said much about what happened, and she hadn't needed to. The weapon she carried told the story for her. A rifle far beyond the standard equipment they scavenged from battlefields, perfectly maintained and marked with British military engravings. It was a symbol of victory, one that silenced every doubt the others might have had. Men and women who had once barely noticed her now looked at her with a mix of respect and fear. She was no longer just the quiet girl who collected casings. She was the one who had outdueled a professional sniper at impossible range. In a war where stories traveled faster than bullets, hers became a legend almost overnight. Fighters whispered her name around campfires, exaggerating the distance of her shot, turning her into a myth. Some claimed she had killed him at 5,000 meters, others swore she had taken him down with a single breath, her aim so steady it could pierce the sky. Zara didn't correct them. Let them believe what they wanted. Myths were as powerful as weapons, and for the first time she understood that power could be hers. Still, she wasn't comfortable with the sudden attention. She preferred shadows, moving quietly through the ruins with her scarf pulled tight around her face, avoiding unnecessary conversations. The rifle was heavy on her back, not just in weight but in meaning. She cleaned it thoroughly, memorizing every detail of its construction, every scratch on its metal. It wasn't just a tool now, it was a reminder. Every time she held it, she remembered the man on the ridge, the calm way he'd watched her, the patience in his movements, the way his body had crumpled when her bullet found him. She didn't regret it, but the memory followed her like a shadow. Killing wasn't new to her unit, it was a part of daily life. But this was different. This kill had changed something inside her, sharpening her focus and hardening her resolve. Her commander, a weathered man named Farid, was the first to truly grasp what her victory meant. He was a veteran of countless battles, his face lined with scars and exhaustion. One evening, as Zara sat cleaning her new rifle in the dim glow of a lantern, Farid approached and crouched beside her. "You understand what you've done, girl?" he asked quietly, his voice low so the others wouldn't hear. Zara didn't look up, her hands working methodically as she checked the bolt and polished the barrel. "I survived," she said simply. Farid chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You didn't just survive. You humiliated them. That sniper wasn't just any soldier. Men like him are ghosts, they haunt battlefields, they break morale, they're worth entire squads of infantry. You killed a legend and now you're becoming one." His tone carried both admiration and warning. Zara set the rifle down and finally met his gaze. "Then let them be afraid of me," she said. There was no bravado in her voice, just cold certainty. Farid studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. "Fear is a weapon," he murmured. "Use it wisely." From that day on, Zara's role in the resistance began to change. She was no longer assigned to scavenger duties. Instead, she was trained, truly trained, for the first time. Farid himself took her under his wing, teaching her everything he knew about long-range shooting, stealth, and survival. The battered rifle she'd used before was set aside. Now she carried the British sniper's weapon everywhere she went. It felt strange at first, too perfect, too precise for her calloused hands. But over time, it became an extension of her, a part of her body as natural as her heartbeat. She learned to shoot in crosswinds, to calculate distance by instinct, to anticipate her enemies' moves before they made them. Every lesson was hard-earned, every shot fired with the understanding that she was preparing for a war she couldn't afford to lose. At night, lying awake in the makeshift barracks, Zara often thought about the sniper she had killed. She had searched his pockets that day, taken everything of value, but there had been no personal photos, no notes, nothing to tell her who he was. He remained nameless in her mind, a faceless symbol of the war. She wondered if someone out there mourned him, if his comrades cursed her name now. The thought didn't trouble her as much as it once might have. This was the world they lived in. Kill or be killed, no room for innocence. But deep down she also knew something had awakened in her that day. She had tasted what it felt like to take control, to seize power in a world that had stripped her of everything. That feeling was intoxicating, dangerous, and impossible to forget. Weeks passed and Zara's reputation only grew. Her first true mission as a sniper came when a convoy of armored vehicles attempted to cross through a canyon near their base of operations. Zara had been positioned high on a ridge, her rifle steady, her breath slow. She had picked off the lead driver with a single shot, stopping the convoy in its tracks, then disabled the rear vehicle to trap them. Her comrades swarmed the canyon, ambushing the soldiers while she covered them from above. Not a single fighter from her side was lost. That mission cemented her status as a deadly marksman, and whispers of her skill began to spread beyond her unit. The enemy started referring to her as the Ghost of our Valley, a name that made its way back to her camp one evening. Zara said nothing when she heard it, but the faintest smile tugged at her lips. Still, beneath the surface she felt the weight of everything she was becoming. She had started this war as a girl who only wanted to survive, collecting brass and scavenging supplies. Now she was a weapon, a force that soldiers feared, her face hidden behind a scarf, her rifle always close at hand. The girl who had once trembled at the sound of distant gunfire now lay perfectly still for hours, her heartbeat calm, waiting for the right moment to strike. The transformation frightened her sometimes, though she would never admit it. She had traded innocence for survival, humanity for precision. And yet she couldn't stop. She didn't want to. One evening, after another successful mission, she found herself sitting alone on a hill overlooking the battlefield. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows over the wreckage below. The smell of burning fuel carried on the wind, mingling with the scent of dust and dry grass. Zara rested her rifle across her knees, her eyes scanning the distant horizon. She thought of her family, of the home that no longer stood, of the laughter and warmth that had once filled her life. They would never know what she had become, never see the path she had chosen. She wasn't sure if they would be proud of her or horrified. Maybe both. A movement in the distance caught her eye, a bird circling lazily over the canyon. Her sharp gaze followed it, scanning the land out of habit. Always alert. Always ready. That was her life now. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was shaping the war one bullet at a time. And though the weight of that truth pressed down on her shoulders, it also gave her purpose. She wasn't the hunted girl hiding in the rubble anymore. She was the hunter. The silence of the ruined city was never truly silent. Even when gunfire wasn't cracking in the distance, even when artillery wasn't shaking the ground, there was always a hum beneath everything, the whisper of wind through shattered windows, the creak of broken metal swinging in the breeze, the distant buzz of a drone's engine scanning the streets. Zara had learned to hear all of it. To her, the ruined city was alive, its shadows breathing, its echoes speaking in code only she could understand. But that day, as she crouched on a rooftop overlooking a narrow street, the silence felt different. Heavy. Watching. She tightened her grip on her rifle, her finger hovering near the trigger, and swept her gaze slowly across the horizon. Something was wrong. She could feel it deep in her bones, that old instinct honed by weeks of stalking and being stalked. This wasn't the uneasy calm of a battlefield between skirmishes. This was the stillness of a trap. She stayed perfectly still for hours, ignoring the ache in her legs and the dry burn in her throat. Zara had been trained to endure discomfort, to become part of her surroundings, and she melted into the rooftop as the sun dipped lower, painting the ruins in long shadows. She didn't see movement, but she could sense it, the subtle shift in the air, the way the birds avoided a particular alley, the way the drone above wasn't circling randomly but scanning a precise grid. She was being hunted. Farid had warned her this would happen. After her second ambush mission had left a column of armored vehicles smoldering in the canyon, she'd noticed a change in the enemy's tactics. Patrols became more cautious, snipers began to appear in places she'd never seen them before, and their drones lingered longer over her unit's territory. She had become a ghost story to their soldiers, but ghosts don't go unchallenged forever. They were coming for her now, not with fear but with strategy, and she knew it. The sun dipped behind the horizon and she finally shifted, crawling backward across the rooftop and slipping into the shadows of a collapsed stairwell. Her scarf was pulled tight around her face, her rifle cradled in her arms as she descended silently, every movement calculated, every footstep soft. She didn't have a plan yet. All she knew was that she couldn't stay. If they were hunting her, they wouldn't stop until she was dead, and the fact that she hadn't seen them yet meant they were good. Maybe as good as she was. She reached the ground level and slipped through a shattered doorway into a darkened street. The city smelled of smoke and metal, the stench of decay lingering beneath it all. Her boots barely made a sound as she moved along the wall, her eyes flicking constantly between shadowed windows and rooftops. The street felt wrong. Too open. She ducked into an alley, hugging the wall as she made her way toward an old market square that offered multiple exits. She hated being cornered. She hated being predictable. That was what they wanted. A faint glint on a rooftop ahead froze her in place. It was brief, just a flicker of light like sunlight bouncing off glass, but it was enough. A scope. She didn't hesitate. Dropping to her stomach, she rolled behind a broken concrete barrier, her heartbeat calm despite the sudden surge of adrenaline. A bullet cracked through the wall where her head had been, sending chips of concrete raining down on her. They'd spotted her. She moved fast, crawling along the barrier and slipping into a side alley, her movements fluid and precise. Another shot rang out, shattering glass behind her, but she was already gone, her mind working at lightning speed. There were at least 2 snipers. One had eyes on her position, and the other was covering potential escape routes. This wasn't a random patrol. This was a hunt. They'd studied her, mapped her habits, and set the trap perfectly. Zara gritted her teeth. Fine. Let them hunt. She would turn this hunt back on them. She ducked into the shadow of a collapsed building, slipping through a hole in the wall and finding herself in a stairwell that smelled of mold and rust. Moving silently, she ascended to the third floor, where a hole in the outer wall provided a clear view of the street she'd just left. She took her time, resting the barrel of her rifle on a pile of rubble and peering through the scope. Her eyes swept the rooftops, searching for the flicker of movement that would betray her hunters. There. A silhouette just barely visible against the faint glow of the sky, lying prone on a rooftop across the street. He was good, perfectly still, perfectly positioned, but not invisible. She slowed her breathing, lined up the shot, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet found its mark, and the sniper's body jerked violently before going still. Zara didn't wait to confirm. She shifted immediately, crawling back through the stairwell and down to the second floor. A single sniper wouldn't be alone, and the shot had already given away her position. She needed to keep moving. As she slipped out of the building, a bullet tore through the wall inches from her head. The second sniper. She dropped low and sprinted across the street, diving behind the wreck of an overturned truck. Another shot rang out, sparking against the truck's chassis. She took a deep breath, her mind calm, and peeked around the corner, scanning the rooftops again. This one was smarter, staying completely hidden, waiting for her to make a mistake. But Zara wasn't the same scavenger girl she had been weeks ago. She had become a predator too. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening. The distant buzz of a drone was moving away now, probably heading to report back to whoever had sent them. The sniper would be repositioning soon, trying to flank her. She used that knowledge to her advantage, moving fast and low, circling through the maze of alleys until she reached a building that offered a perfect view of the suspected location. She climbed swiftly, silently, her body moving like a shadow through the rubble. When she reached the top floor, she flattened herself against the wall and waited, her breath slow and steady. Minutes passed. Then she saw it, a glint of glass, the faintest shift of movement. She didn't hesitate. Her shot was quick, precise. The second sniper collapsed, his rifle clattering against the rooftop. Silence followed, thick and heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the drone now too far to pose a threat. Zara exhaled slowly, her hands steady as she lowered her weapon. She stayed there for a long moment, scanning the horizon. The hunters were dead, but she knew this was only the beginning. The enemy wouldn't stop. She wasn't just a ghost story anymore. She was a priority target. They would send more. Better ones. And they wouldn't just be hunting her, they'd be hunting her entire unit. Zara descended carefully, her mind already racing. She couldn't let them dictate the fight. She had to stay ahead, had to make them fear her more than they wanted her dead. If they were coming for her, she would become the shadow they couldn't catch, the whisper in the ruins that haunted their every step. She wasn't afraid of being hunted anymore. She would turn this battlefield into her own hunting ground. Zara moved like a shadow through the city's skeleton, her senses stretched thin, every step measured. The two snipers she had killed weren't just random sharpshooters. Their positioning, their equipment, even the way they had synchronized their shots spoke of precision teams sent with one purpose: to eliminate her. They weren't reckless conscripts or local mercenaries. These were professionals. And that fact sat heavy in her mind. Someone high up wanted her gone badly enough to deploy elite operatives. That meant she wasn't just an annoyance to their command anymore, she was a threat to their entire operation. As the moon rose over the shattered skyline, Zara crouched inside the burned-out husk of an apartment block, stripping the gear from one of the fallen snipers she'd dragged in hours earlier. His rifle was state-of-the-art, far more advanced than anything her unit had access to. The scope alone was a work of art, with thermal imaging and wind correction software built in. She examined it carefully, her fingers tracing the engraved insignia on the barrel. A falcon, wings spread wide, clutching a spear. She frowned. That wasn't a standard military emblem. This wasn't just a soldier. This was a specialist from a private unit, likely hired guns from one of the black-budget outfits whispered about in Farid's briefings. That meant two things. Whoever had sent them was both well-funded and desperate. And they wouldn't stop here. She slung the sniper's gear across her back and melted into the night, moving swiftly through alleys and over broken walls, heading back toward her unit's hideout. But as she approached their safe house, a flicker of instinct stopped her cold. The street ahead was too quiet. The usual signs of life, a stray cat darting between shadows, the distant hum of a generator, were absent. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the windows. No glint of glass, no shifting shadow, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up anyway. She stepped back slowly into the alley, retracing her steps. Something wasn't right. Instead of going through the front, she scaled a drain pipe on a nearby building, using the cover of darkness to make her way to the rooftop that overlooked their hideout. From above the scene was chilling. The street outside their safe house was empty, but she spotted faint heat signatures along the rooftops. Not one. Not two. At least 5. And then she saw it. A small drone hovering silently near a window on the 3rd floor, scanning the interior. Her chest tightened. They were already here and they weren't here to negotiate. Zara's mind worked quickly. Her team was inside. She couldn't just storm in, she'd get herself and everyone else killed. This wasn't a raid, it was an execution setup. They weren't coming to arrest her unit, they were going to wipe it out. She retreated into the shadows, circling the block until she found a collapsed building with a clear line of sight on one of the rooftop snipers. Moving like a predator, she assembled the stolen rifle, adjusted the advanced scope and zeroed in. Her breath slowed as she centered the crosshairs on the sniper's helmet. One squeeze of the trigger and his body slumped backward silently. She didn't wait to see if anyone noticed. She shifted position immediately, moving down a staircase and into another alley, always staying unpredictable. By the time she reached her second vantage point, shouts were echoing faintly through the night. The enemy knew something was wrong. Another shot, another body falling. The hunters were beginning to panic. Good. Let them feel it. She moved again, circling like a wolf. The sniper rifle felt heavy in her hands, but it wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. She wasn't prey. She was the shadow they should fear. Every time she squeezed the trigger, another professional hunter went down. They had the tech, the training, and the numbers, but she had something they didn't. She knew this city like the back of her hand. Every alley, every tunnel, every rooftop was part of her home turf. And she had patience. Minutes stretched into hours as the silent war raged across the rooftops. By the time Zara slipped into an abandoned grocery store overlooking the safe house, only 2 of the attackers were left. She spotted one crawling along a roof, clearly panicked, his head darting back and forth as he searched for the ghost killing his teammates. She lined up her shot and dropped him cleanly. The last one was smart enough not to move. He stayed prone, using every bit of cover he could find, his rifle trained on the safe house door. Zara circled again, coming up behind him through a neighboring building. When she was close enough to hear him breathing, she drew her knife instead of firing. Silent kills sent a stronger message. She was on him before he could react, her blade pressing against his throat. He froze, his hands trembling. Zara's voice was calm, almost cold. "Who sent you?" He hesitated, his breath ragged. She pressed the knife harder and he finally stammered out a name. "Falcon Division, we were contracted, special assignment." She frowned. Falcon Division. She'd heard of them, elite mercenaries rumored to be ex-special forces, working only for the highest bidders. If they were here, it meant the enemy saw her as more than just a nuisance. She was a target worth millions. "Who's your client?" she asked. He hesitated again and she could see the fear in his eyes. Whoever was paying him was far more terrifying than she was. I don't know. Orders came through encrypted channels. "We just had your picture, your last known positions, your reputation." His voice trembled as he said the last word. She silenced him with a quick, efficient strike, wiping the blade clean on his jacket. The mercenaries were dead, but their presence told her everything she needed to know. The war had shifted. The enemy wasn't just trying to take ground anymore, they were trying to take her out specifically. And if they'd sent Falcon Division, this was only the beginning. She slipped into the safe house through a hidden tunnel, finding Farid and the rest of her small team huddled in the dim light of a lantern. His eyes widened when he saw her, taking in the blood on her scarf and the heavy rifle slung over her shoulder. "They were here, weren't they?" he asked. She nodded. "A hit team. Falcon Division. They weren't here to scout, they were here to kill us all." Farid cursed under his breath, his hands trembling slightly as he ran them through his beard. "This changes everything. If they're spending that kind of money—" "They're afraid," Zara interrupted, her voice steady. "That's good. Fear makes people sloppy. But we need to move. Tonight." Farid nodded grimly, already signaling the others to gather their gear. Zara stepped away from them, her mind sharp, her pulse steady. She had killed professional hunters tonight. She had turned their perfect ambush into chaos. But something about Falcon Division gnawed at her. If they had encrypted orders, if they were mercenaries, there was someone behind them, someone who wanted her dead badly enough to pour resources into it. And she intended to find out who that was. The safe house was abandoned within the hour. Zara led her small team through the skeletal remains of the city, their boots silent on broken asphalt, the only sound the occasional rustle of wind through shattered windows. Each of them carried everything they owned on their backs, rifles, ammunition, rations, and fragments of intelligence gathered over months of fighting. They moved like ghosts, vanishing into the maze of alleys and service tunnels that crisscrossed the city's underbelly. For years, Zara had been on the defensive, striking from shadows and disappearing before the enemy could retaliate. Tonight something changed. Tonight she wasn't just running. She was hunting. As dawn broke over the city, painting the horizon with muted streaks of orange and gray, they reached a forgotten subway station buried deep beneath the rubble. Farid sealed the door behind them with chains and reinforced bars while Zara spread out the gear she had stripped from the mercenaries. The high-tech rifle, encrypted radios, and custom armor were worth a fortune, but it was the data module she had pried from one of their helmets that caught her attention. She slid it into a battered laptop powered by a hand-cranked generator, her eyes narrowing as streams of encrypted code scrolled across the screen. "Think you can crack it?" Farid asked, his voice low. "Given time," she murmured, fingers dancing over the keyboard. "But we don't have time, do we?" Farid shook his head. "Not if they send another team." She didn't respond, her focus narrowing to a razor's edge. Whoever Falcon Division worked for had invested heavily in staying invisible. But Zara had learned something important during her years on the battlefield. No one is invisible forever. Everyone makes mistakes. Hours passed as she decrypted layer after layer of security. Her team rested in shifts, some eating quietly in the shadows, others cleaning weapons, but the tension in the air was thick enough to taste. When the final encryption layer dissolved, Zara's eyes sharpened. A name appeared: Orion Holdings, a private security conglomerate with ties to multiple governments and a reputation for doing the kind of work that could never appear in official reports. She scrolled deeper, tracing the mission logs, payment transfers, and communications routing. The data painted a chilling picture. Orion wasn't just running Falcon Division. They had been pulling strings in this war from the shadows for months, supplying both sides with weapons while targeting high-value assets, like her. "They're not just mercenaries," Zara said, turning the laptop so far it could see. "They're orchestrating the entire conflict. Selling weapons, sabotaging peace talks, assassinating anyone who threatens their profits. We were just another loose end to tie up." Farid's jaw tightened. "So they make money off every drop of blood spilled here?" "Yes," she said, her voice hard. "And now they know I'm more than a nuisance. That's why Falcon Division was sent. They don't just want me dead, they want me erased." Farid leaned forward, his dark eyes blazing. "So we erased them first." Zara nodded slowly. This was no longer about survival. It was about dismantling a machine that profited off death. That night, Zara laid out her plan. They would strike back, not blindly but with precision. Orion Holdings was hidden behind layers of shell companies, but she had traced a field command post to a fortified skyscraper on the edge of the city, where Falcon Division coordinated their operations. If they could breach it, they could send a message that would shake Orion's entire network. "We won't survive a frontal assault," Farid pointed out. "Which is why we won't go frontal," Zara replied. She drew a crude map in the dust, marking ventilation shafts, service tunnels, and guard rotations she had memorized from weeks of observation. "We'll move like ghosts. Hit their command post, pull every scrap of intel we can, and disappear before they even realize what happened." Her team didn't hesitate. They trusted her completely. She had earned it 100 times over. 2 nights later, under the cover of a storm that howled across the shattered city, they made their move. The skyscraper loomed like a jagged spear in the distance, its windows flickering with blue light, drones circling its perimeter like vultures. Zara led the way, every step deliberate, every motion calculated. They used old drainage tunnels to approach unseen, emerging in a service alley littered with trash and broken crates. The first obstacle was a patrol of armored guards. Zara signaled her team, and within seconds 2 of her fighters slipped into position. Silenced shots cracked softly in the storm, and the guards crumpled soundlessly. They dragged the bodies into the shadows and moved forward, Zara's heartbeat steady. The skyscraper's security was formidable, but Zara had studied every detail. They entered through a maintenance hatch, climbed a narrow shaft, and bypassed security cameras using stolen access codes from the data module. Every step felt like walking on a knife's edge. One wrong move and Falcon Division would descend on them like wolves. Finally they reached the operations floor. Through the glass walls of a high-tech control room, Zara saw rows of monitors displaying live drone feeds, sniper nest coordinates, and troop movements. A handful of operators sat at consoles, unaware that death was already in the room. Zara gave the signal. The fight was brutal and silent. Her team moved with surgical precision, knives and suppressed weapons flashing in the dim blue light. In less than a minute the control room was theirs. Farid sealed the doors while Zara connected her laptop to their network, her fingers flying across the keys as she copied terabytes of data. Names, bank accounts, contracts, evidence of Orion Holdings' entire shadow empire poured onto her screen. But as the last files transferred, an alarm blared. Zara cursed under her breath. They had tripped a silent failsafe. Falcon Division was coming. 2 minutes, maybe less, Farid said, scanning the hallway through the scope of his rifle. Hold them off, Zara ordered, slinging her pack over her shoulder. We need 30 seconds more. Her team formed a defensive perimeter, covering every angle as boots thundered in the distance. The storm outside roared like an angry beast, wind rattling the shattered windows. Zara's hands moved faster, pulling the last files and setting a timed virus to wipe Orion's local servers. Then the lights flickered. The building trembled under the weight of an explosion, likely Falcon Division breaching the lower floors. Zara yanked the drive from the console. Move. They retreated through a service corridor, fighting their way through waves of heavily armed mercenaries. The firefight was deafening, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness as Zara's team cut through their attackers. Every hallway became a choke point, every corner a trap. By the time they reached the maintenance shaft, 3 of her fighters were wounded, but they had the data. They descended into the tunnels, sealing the hatch behind them, just as reinforcements flooded the building. The skyscraper shook again, this time from Zara's virus detonating a failsafe that overloaded its power grid. Flames erupted behind them, smoke billowing through the tunnels as they vanished into the night. When they finally emerged into the ruins on the outskirts of the city, they were exhausted, bloodied, but alive. Zara sank to her knees, clutching the encrypted drive like a relic. They had just struck a blow against an invisible empire. Orion would come for them harder now, but she had proof that could tear the mask off the people pulling the strings of this endless war. Farid knelt beside her, his face streaked with dirt and blood but lit by a rare smile. They won't see us as prey anymore, he said quietly. No, Zara replied, her eyes cold as steel. From now on they're the prey. The end.